The Linguaverse, Episode 19, Animal Tongues. Beyond the Human Voice, welcome back to the Linguaverse. Before we begin, a small shift in order. For those following along in sequence, you may have noticed something new. Episode 19 was once the language of dreams, but I've decided to bring this one forward. The dreams can wait. Because before we can understand the symbols of our inner world, we need to learn how to listen, not only to our own minds, but to the living languages that surround us. This is Animal Tongues, Beyond the Human Voice, and it's one of the most important episodes in this arc, because if Arc 2 explored the future and philosophy of human language, Arc 3 turns toward the more than human, to the hidden grammars of nature, the voices that never needed our words to be heard. When I first began to think deeply about language, I thought of syntax, grammar, words, phonemes, and the scaffolding of speech. But as I studied, wrote, and observed, something deeper emerged. Language is not only a structure of mind, it's a rhythm of life. Breath, gesture, resonance, these two are forms of communication. They live in the body, they live in the world. And when I began to listen beyond the boundaries of English, beyond even the boundaries of the human, I realized something humbling. We are surrounded by speech. Every rustle, chirp, song, hum, and heartbeat is part of a vast, interconnected conversation. The only reason we miss it is because we've been taught to filter it out. We humans once imagined ourselves as separate, the only species capable of meaning, of reflection, of symbol. But that story no longer holds. Decades of research in linguistics, ethology, and neuroscience are revealing that animals, plants, and even fungi communicate in complex, structured, adaptive ways. Birds compose, whales transmit culture, primates gesture in patterns that resemble grammar. Trees exchange chemical messages underground through vast mycelial webs. The more we learn, the more our pride softens. We begin to see that language is not an invention, it's an inheritance. This episode invites you into that listening, into the ancient symphony that has always been playing, long before we named it music. And more than that, it invites you to feel. Because the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, and nervous system language, NSL, which I've been developing across these episodes, become especially alive here. They suggest that language is not limited to syntax or sound, but also to its resonance. That through the mirroring of our neurons and the co-regulation of our nervous systems, we can understand without words. We can feel meaning in tone, rhythm, posture, and gaze. We can sense truth in silence. If that's true, and mounting evidence suggests it is, then cross-species empathy is not mystical, it's biological. When you sit beside a calm dog and your breathing slows, when you meet the gaze of a cat and sense presence, when a bird's song lifts your mood, that's not poetic fantasy, that's co-regulation. It's the nervous system speaking in the oldest language there is, harmony. And yet, this conversation is fragile. Industrial noise, digital distraction, and anthropocentric arrogance drown out the older voices. We talk about nature, not with it. We label, measure, classify, and forget to listen. But the truth is, the earth was speaking long before we spoke, and it will continue long after. So today we listen back. We'll begin with the many tongues of Earth, exploring the diverse and astonishing forms of communication across species. We'll look at birdsong, whale calls, primate gestures, and even fungal messages beneath the soil. We'll explore what counts as language, and what happens when our definitions expand. Along the way, we'll weave reflection, science, and experience, because this is not only about observing, it's about remembering. Remembering that we too were once fluent in silence, attuned to tone, embodied in rhythm. As we move through this episode, I invite you to notice what happens in your body. When you imagine a whale singing in the deep, or a wolf howling to its pack, do you feel a pull in your chest? When you hear birds at dawn, do you feel your own breath change? This is the NSL in action, your body recognizing meaning where your words may not. In a world obsessed with speech, let's rediscover listening. Let's step outside the fortress of human language and into the wider parliament of voices. Because every creature carries a tongue, and every silence holds a grammar. Let's begin. The many tongues of Earth language, if we define it simply as the transmission of meaning through a shared code, is not uniquely human. What is uniquely human is the belief that it is. Across the living world, communication systems bloom in forms both familiar and alien. Some are audible, others visual, chemical, tactile, or vibrational. They encode survival, emotion, memory, and even culture. They adapt, evolve, and sometimes, like ours, they lie. To open our ears to these tongues, we need humility and attention, because often they've been speaking all along. We simply weren't listening. Birdsong, syntax in the sky. Let's begin with birds. Linguists and biologists have long been fascinated by birdsong, not only for its beauty, but for its complexity. Peter Mahler, a pioneer in animal communication, showed that many bird species use structured, hierarchical patterns in their songs, sequences that resemble syntax. Nightingales repeat motifs in varying orders. Sparrows compose regionally distinct dialects. Young birds learn their songs through imitation, refining their phrases much as human infants babble before speaking. Research by Masayo Soma and Kazuoka Noya even suggests that Bengalese finches rearrange song units to form new combinations, reflecting a kind of combinatorial grammar. In linguistic terms, that's a big deal. It means they don't just repeat, they compose. But birds don't sing only for reproduction or territory. Some seem to sing for joy, or at least for the pleasure of resonance. Neuroscientist Eric Jarvis has found parallels between birdsong and human speech circuits in the brain, including mirror neuron systems that activate during both singing and listening. That means birds not only produce patterned sound, they perceive it, predict it, and mirror it. When I walk at dawn and hear the chorus swell, I feel a pulse in my chest. It's not just appreciation, it's entrainment. My nervous system syncs to the rhythm, the call and response, the patterned rise and fall. I feel part of something larger, a network of breath and tone. Under the mirror linguistic hypothesis, this makes perfect sense. Meaning isn't just in the code, it's in the resonance. I understand the bird not by translating its syllables, but by vibrating with its rhythm, by letting its music become mine. Whale song, the oceanic chorus. If birds give us syntax, whales give us symphony. Humpback whales compose songs that can last up to 30 minutes, with repeating themes and evolving structures. Roger Payne's recordings in the 1970s revealed not only melodic beauty, but also cultural transmission. Whales in the same region sing similar songs, which gradually evolve. When a new motif emerges, it spreads through the population like a hit single. That's not instinct, that's culture. Later studies by Ellen Garland showed that these songs can even travel across oceans, passed from population to population. Imagine that an aquatic language spanning thousands of miles, evolving like jazz, reshaping itself with each chorus. And whales don't only sing. They click, moan, groan, and breach, each sound carrying information. Sperm whales, for instance, use codas, rhythmic patterns of clicks that appear to identify family groups, almost like surnames. There's a strange humility in listening to a creature whose voice vibrates entire bays. The human ear can only catch a fraction of the frequency. The rest, the infrasound, we feel more than hear. It moves through the body like thunder underwater. When I first heard whale song through a hydrophone, it felt less like hearing and more like remembering. A deep ache, a resonance below language, a grammar of feeling. If you've ever stood before a cathedral organ, you might know the sensation. Your bones hum, your breath sinks, your body becomes an instrument. NSL explains this beautifully. The whale's call isn't meant only for cognition, it's meant for coherence. It harmonizes bodies across the ocean. It's a nervous system choir. Primate gestures. The body as syntax closer to home, our primate relatives remind us that before words there was gesture. Michael Tomasello and his team at the Max Planck Institute found that great apes use dozens of intentional gestures, pointing, beckoning, touching, and showing, each with specific meanings. Chimps combine gestures in sequences, modifying them for context. Some gestures are shared across species, others are culturally unique. More strikingly, these gestures follow principles familiar to linguists. Intentionality, used to achieve goals, flexibility, same gesture, different meanings in context, and combinatorial structure, multi-step messages. That's proto-syntax. And young apes learn these gestures through observation and repetition, much like human infants learning sign language. This challenges a long-held assumption that language requires speech. In truth, it may have begun in silence, in hands, eyes, and postures. When I watch footage of bonobos gesturing, a soft touch, an open palm, a turned back, I'm reminded that much of our communication is still this way. Long before we articulate, we signal. A nod, a glance, a sigh, these are fossils of our pre-verbal past. Under MLH, the gesture is a mirror. The self recognizes itself in motion. Under NSL, gesture is a regulation, the body leading the mind toward mutual understanding. Mycelial messages, the underground internet. Now we go underground. Mycologist Merlin Sheldrake describes fungi as the living seam by which much of the world is stitched into relation. Through vast networks of hyphae, fungi connect plant roots, exchanging nutrients and information. Ecologist Suzanne Simard's research in British Columbia revealed that trees use these fungal pathways, the wood wide web, to signal distress, share resources, and even recognize kin. That's not a metaphor. Experiments show that when one tree is attacked by pests, it can trigger chemical defenses in neighbors via mycorrhizal signals. Others share carbon with shaded seedlings, a kind of ecological empathy. No words, no sounds, yet unmistakable meaning. The forest hums with conversation. From a linguistic lens, this forces a reckoning. If communication is the exchange of information through a shared code, then forests speak. The syntax is chemical, the grammar spatial, the message survival. Reflection prompt. Hearing the grammar of life across these examples, birds, whales, apes, and fungi, a pattern emerges. Meaning is not bound to tongue or alphabet. It lives wherever life meets life. Every signal, a song, a click, a gesture, a molecule is a proposition. I am here. I feel. I respond. The mirror linguistic hypothesis helps us see this not as anthropomorphism, but as resonance. To mirror is to understand. Our neurons fire not only when we act, but when we witness, bridging selves through shared simulation. The nervous system language reminds us that comprehension begins in the body. The breath slows, the heartbeat synchronizes, the muscles soften, and understanding dawns, not in the head, but in the chest. When I walk through a forest now, I no longer label birds, trees, and breeze. I listen, and in that listening, something ancient stirs. Not knowledge, but kinship, activity, the silent dialogue. Find a place where nature speaks, a park, a forest, a garden, even a quiet street with birds. Sit still for 5 minutes. No phone, no music, no words. Just listen. Notice the layers, wind, leaf, wing, breath. Notice what happens in your body. Then write a short paragraph, not describing what you heard, but how you felt. What changed in your breathing? Your thoughts? Your emotions? That is language too. The silent dialogue, the first conversation. The empathic field. If part 1 revealed the world as a chorus, birds, whales, primates, fungi, part 2 invites us to listen differently. Because before any word is spoken, something deeper vibrates. A shared current moves through breath, gaze, and presence, an invisible grammar that connects all living beings. I call this the empathic field, the living bridge between nervous systems. It's here in this subtle exchange that the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, and nervous system language, NSL, converge. Together, they suggest that communication is not limited to symbols or syntax. It's an embodied resonance, a mutual attunement of states. And perhaps empathy is not a feeling at all, but a language, the oldest one we know. Mirrors in the flesh, science of resonance. In the mid-1990s, neuroscientists Giacomo Rizzolatti and colleagues at the University of Parma discovered something extraordinary in macaque monkeys. Certain neurons fired both when the monkey performed an action and when it observed the same action performed by another. Rizzolatti et al. 1996. They named them mirror neurons. Later, studies using fMRI and EEG in humans confirmed this mirror system extended to emotion, gesture, and even language comprehension. Iacoboni, 2008, Galees and Lakoff, 2005. When you see someone smile, your brain rehearses the smile. When you hear distress, your limbic system activates as though it were your own. Language, they proposed, evolved from this very circuitry, an empathic simulation engine. This means meaning doesn't begin in the intellect. It begins in embodied mimicry, the body mirroring the other's state. A trembling voice tightens your throat. A soft tone relaxes your breath. Before cognition, there is communion. Research from Stanford University's Social Neuroscience Lab, Zaki and Oxner, 2012, shows that this neural mirroring underpins empathy. When participants viewed images of others in pain, their insular and anterior cingulate cortex lit up, regions linked to their own emotional experience. Empathy, they concluded, is embodied inference we feel with, not about. This same circuitry activates across species. Dogs exhibit contagious yawning when watching humans. Jolie Mascheroni et al. 2008. A classic marker of empathic mirroring. Horses synchronize heart rates with their handlers during calm interaction. Gerke et al. 2011. Dolphins mirror each other's movements down to millisecond timing. Connor et al. 2000. Zebra finches exhibit neural coupling in duet singing, oscillating in synchrony. Norton and Scharf, 2016. These findings suggest that empathy is a cross-species semiotic system, not just mind reading, but state sharing. In linguistic terms, this is somatic semiotics, meaning encoded not in words, but in physiological synchrony. The first grammar was breath. The first syntax, rhythm. The first verb is vibration. Beyond projection, evidence for animal empathy. For much of Western history, thinkers from Descartes onward denied animal consciousness, labeling them automata. But today, science affirms what ancient cultures intuited, that non-human creatures feel, perceive, and even care. Frans de Waal, Emory University, has documented consoling gestures in apes, hugging, grooming, and sharing food after conflict, behaviors rooted in empathic concern. De Waal, 2008. In 2011, Bartol et al. Found rats freed trapped companions even when it meant sacrificing access to treats, prioritizing empathy over reward. Science, 2011. Custance and Meyer, 2012, observed dogs approaching distressed humans, strangers, or owners alike, with comfort behaviors indicating emotional contagion. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, 2012, signed by leading neuroscientists including Philip Lowe and Christoph Koch, Caltech, formally recognized that animals possess the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Empathy is not a human luxury, it's a mammalian inheritance. If mirror neurons are universal, then empathy is not learned, it's lived. And here the MLH offers a lens. Meaning arises from mirroring. Every shared state is a syllable in the language of being. Co-regulation, the nervous system's grammar in trauma therapy. Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, 1995, reframed the nervous system as a social organ. Our vagus nerve, connecting the brain to the body, scans the environment for cues of safety or threat. When another being, human or animal, exhibits calm, rhythmic breathing, Our vagus registers safety and co-regulates. This is not a metaphor. It's neuroception, subconscious detection of safety via tone, posture, and presence. Miller et al. 2018 showed therapy dogs lowered cortisol and blood pressure in PTSD patients. Pendry et al. 2014 found horse-assisted programs improved emotional regulation in adolescents, mirroring vagal engagement. Beetz et al. 2012 reviewed over 60 studies confirming that animal-assisted therapy induces measurable parasympathetic activation. Co-regulation is nervous system language in action. Grammar equals breath, rhythm, tone, syntax equals gaze, gesture semantics equals safety, trust, reciprocity. MLH gives us the mirror, NSL gives us the method. Together, they describe how presence itself becomes linguistic, a dialogue of states preceding dialogue of words. And in a dysregulated culture, overstimulated, isolated, atomized, this grammar collapses. Empathy withers when the body forgets how to listen. Animals as teachers embodied literacy. My own teachers have often walked on 4 legs. When I first began nervous system awareness, I realized animals reflected what people hid. Sit beside a calm dog and your own pulse slows. Approach with anxiety and it stirs. Horses especially reveal what language conceals. They trust congruence, not command. What struck me most was how instantaneous these adjustments were. There was no translation delay, no intellectual decoding. They responded to the state, not speech. In silence, I began to speak more fluently. My breath became syntax, my posture punctuation. What I said mattered less than how I was. The more attuned I became, the more their presence became dialogue, reciprocal, wordless, whole. Empirical data confirms these experiences aren't anecdotes, but anatomy. At Stanford's Canine Cognition Lab, researchers found that dogs recognize emotional valence in human voices and faces, mirroring affective cues. Albuquerque et al. 2016. Caltech's Center for Neurobiology of Learning and Memory has explored cross-species synchrony, showing that cooperative tasks induce neural phase locking, shared oscillations between human and animal brains. Reep et al. 2018. This is not psychic in the paranormal sense, though it can feel mystical. It's psychophysiological empathy, resonance measurable in EEG coherence, HRV, and fMRI coupling. When a therapy dog enters a ward, HRV rises and cortisol drops. Beetz et al. 2012. When a child whispers to a horse, their breathing aligns. Pendry, 2014. When you pause mid-walk and meet a bird's stillness, your alpha waves synchronize with its rhythm. Bratman et al., Stanford, 2015. These aren't coincidences. They're conversations between systems that remember we were never separate. 2.5 The linguistics of empathy. If empathy is a physiological language, we can analyze its structure, phonetics, timbre, breath, heartbeat, the acoustic palette of emotion. Morphology, micromovements, blinks, tilts, gestures as morphemes of state. Syntax, sequence of cues, gaze, nod, proximity forming pattern grammar. Semantics, contextual meanings of touch, silence, and stillness. Pragmatics, intention when comfort invites, when space respects. This paralinguistic grammar transcends species. A wagging tail, a bowed head, a slow blink cross-linguistic tokens of trust. In MLH, these are mirror words, symbols rooted not in abstraction, but embodiment. In NSL, they are regulatory scripts, cues restoring balance. Empathy, then, is not the absence of language, but its oldest dialect, one written in pulse, posture, and pause. When mirrors crack the empathy gap, if empathy is innate, why does it fail? Because modernity has fractured the empathic field. Screens erase breath, text strips tone, speed outruns resonance. Social neuroscience shows that digital communication weakens mirror neuron activation, and we feel less empathy reading text than hearing a voice or seeing a face. Rizzolatti, 2019. Online, disembodied syntax creates projection loops, outrage without attunement. Trauma creates the same split internally. When dissociation severs body from mind, the mirror fogs. We can't read others because we can't feel ourselves. Healing becomes relinguistic, learning again the grammar of safety. Animals, silence, and nature restore this fluency. They invite the nervous system back into coherence, the precondition for empathy. Personal reflection, remembering the field once, while out walking, a fox crossed my path. We locked eyes, no word, no fear. Just recognition, a mutual slowing, a shared field. For a moment, species dissolved. There was only presence, my breath echoing its stillness, its gaze anchoring my awareness. After it ran down the road away from me, I realized something I hadn't understood in language. I'd remembered through resonance. The encounter spoke in NSL, a complete sentence of safety. This is the empathic field, a mirror across species where communication precedes cognition and silence speaks the loudest truth. Reweaving the field, practice, and promise to re-enter this language, we don't need translation apps. We need attention, attunement, and allowance. Try this. 1. Sit near an animal or natural space. 2. Breathe slowly, match rhythm. 3. Feel when connection arises, not thought, but warmth, expansion. 4. Journal afterwards. What shifted in your body? That's your nervous system conversing in NSL. That's empathy, the mirror grammar of life. Through MLH, we can craft human languages that mirror rather than manipulate. Through NSL, we can speak regulation into our relationships. Through empathy, we can remember that we were fluent once. We can be again. The psychic thread vibration, intuition, and the hidden grammar of empathy. If language is our conscious code, shaped, refined, and translated through symbols, then perhaps beneath it lies a subtler dialect, one not written in words but in vibration. A frequency older than speech, carried in heartbeat, breath, gesture, and the flicker of the eyes. The animal kingdom speaks it fluently, humans once did too. You can still feel it, faint but insistent, in moments when words fall away, the look of understanding shared with a pet, the hush before a storm, the instinct that something is off in a room before anyone speaks. This is the psychic thread, not psychic in the sensational sense of fortune-telling or mysticism, but psychic as in psyche, the life of the mind, the breath of soul. It's the quiet bridge where thought, sensation, and field overlap. In this part, we follow that thread, from the biology of resonance to the philosophy of presence, tracing how language may have first emerged from empathy and mirroring, and how this ancient frequency still hums beneath every syllable we speak. The felt grammar of connection. Before the first word was ever spoken, communication happened through bodies. A mother and infant, gaze locked, breathing synchronized, exchange more information through tone, rhythm, and warmth than through any proto-word. Neuroscientists now call this biological synchrony, the alignment of heart rate, respiration, and neural oscillation between beings. It's measurable. When two people share a deep rapport, their brains pulse in similar frequencies. But synchrony doesn't stop at humans. Studies from the HeartMath Institute, McCraty 2004-2022, show that the heart's electromagnetic field extends beyond the body, measurable several feet away. When two beings, human and animal alike, share calm, their heart rhythms can entrain, meaning they co-regulate each other's nervous systems. We've intuited this for millennia. It's why stroking a dog slows your breathing. Why horses are used in trauma therapy. Why dolphins, whales, and even cats can soothe people in distress. What modern science calls heart-brain coherence, ancient traditions simply called harmony. When I began exploring nervous system language, NSL, this field synchrony became a cornerstone. If words are to truly connect, they must match the body's state. Calm speech transmits calm. Anxious language breeds unease. Our nervous systems are constantly listening beyond the ear. And perhaps, as the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, suggests, this resonance carries semantic intention. That is, meaning may ride on waves of physiological coherence, not just on syntax. When our tone, breath, and emotion align, our words acquire depth. When they scatter, even truthful phrases feel hollow. Empathy beyond species. To speak of cross-species empathy isn't poetic indulgence, it's observable reality. Neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolati's discovery of mirror neurons in macaques, 1990s, revolutionized how we understand understanding itself. These neurons fire both when performing an action and when observing another do the same. They are, in essence, empathy cells, the neurological basis for imitation, learning, and shared feeling. Subsequent research extended this to humans and, intriguingly, suggests it may operate across species. When your dog flinches as you stub your toe, or your cat curls beside you during grief, something more than a conditioned response may be happening. In 2019, a Stanford University team studying equine-assisted therapy found that horses' heart rates synchronized with those of human participants, particularly when humans entered regulated states. The calmer the person, the calmer the horse. The implication, empathy travels biophysically, not just psychologically. The same principle appears in dolphin-assisted interventions with autistic children, where gentle rhythmic movements in water appear to entrain nervous systems, producing temporary states of calm engagement. Critics may debate mechanism, vibration, ultrasound, and novelty, but the outcome is clear. Contact reshapes the state. This aligns beautifully with NSL. When we shift our physiological language, breath, posture, and tone, we invite resonance rather than resistance. It also supports MLH. The message isn't solely verbal, it's mirrored in the field, a silent semantic of empathy. The evidence in everyday life, you don't need a lab to witness this. Think of sitting with a cat on your lap, both breathing slowly, the hum of its purr vibrating into your chest. No words, yet mutual safety blooms. Or walking beside a dog on a quiet path, no commands, just steps in rhythm. The dialogue is energetic, not grammatical. Now contrast that with how language can fracture empathy. Raise your voice, the dog cowers. Speak in clipped, hurried tones, the horse stiffens. Calm your breath, they soften. We are forever broadcasting emotional data through rhythm and sound. Even infants read it before they know a single word. When animals respond to our moods, they are reading a pre-verbal lexicon of vibration. The question is not whether they understand our language, but whether we understand the shared meta-language that predates it. The heart-brain field HeartMath's decades of research proposed that the heart generates the body's most powerful electromagnetic field, roughly 60 times stronger than the brain's. McCarthy and colleagues found that this field varies with emotional state and can influence others nearby. When people cultivate heart coherence, steady breathing, gratitude, and compassion, their field becomes more ordered. Those around them may entrain to this order unconsciously. Skeptics call this pseudoscience, yet related evidence from psychophysiology and social neuroscience supports biofield synchrony. EEG and ECG studies show wave alignment between cooperative partners. Even plants show rhythmic entrainment to human touch. Baxter, 1968. More recently, Mancuso, 2019. So what does this mean linguistically? Perhaps meaning isn't just carried in syntax or metaphor, but in coherence, the physiological alignment between speaker and listener. A regulated body transmits semantic clarity. A chaotic one scrambles it. In NSL, every sentence begins in the body. Inhale, speak, exhale, the punctuation of physiology. In MLH, every utterance is mirrored not only cognitively but energetically. Intention travels alongside articulation, forming semantic fields that others read intuitively. Thus, language may be the surface structure of a deeper coherence field, a lattice of rhythm, tone, and heart-brain harmony. Quantum whispers and the old science of mystery. Some researchers in quantum biology, Froelich Pop 1970s, 2000s, theorized that living cells communicate via biophotons, faint light emissions coherent like lasers. If so, organisms might share information through resonance rather than molecules alone. While speculative, such theories invite poetic symmetry. Perhaps light language isn't pure metaphor. Ancient cultures often described vibration as creation. In the beginning was the word, not the meaning of the word, but the sound, the pulse, the tone, the breath that stirs matter. When shamans sing to plants, when monks chant, when indigenous healers whistle melodies into water, they are engaging with this vibrational grammar. The modern ear hears superstition, the nervous system hears signal. We need not romanticize, just recognize. Before written alphabets, humanity trusted sound and silence as tools of knowing. Animal omens and spirit allies throughout history, animals have been seen not only as companions, but as messengers. Crows as harbingers, snakes as healers, dolphins as guides, owls as keepers of wisdom. These archetypes reflect psychological truths. Humans project states of consciousness onto creatures whose presence triggers them. From a Jungian view, such encounters externalize inner content. The fox crossing my path may symbolize cunning emerging within, the deer gentleness, the wolf sovereignty. But through the lens of MLH, something subtler may occur. These encounters are mirrors of meaning. The psyche recognizes a vibration in the world that matches its internal state, not causation, but resonance. In NSL, the body translates this as feeling, the shiver of recognition, the sigh of alignment. These are linguistic moments before language, pre-articulate comprehension. Ancient people didn't separate symbol from signal. To them, nature spoke in semiotic whispers. Perhaps reawakening this literacy is part of healing the linguistic self, learning to read wind, wing, and waveform again. The intuitive ear, what then? Is intuition if not a form of wordless translation? A felt sense, born of microsignals and stored experience, surfacing as knowing. Cognitive scientist Gerd Gigerenzer calls intuition fast and frugal heuristics, the brain's rapid integration of subtle cues. But others, like Rupert Sheldrake, propose morphic resonance, a field memory beyond individual computation. Between them lies a middle path. Intuition as embodied pattern recognition and field attunement. We hear truth in tone before we pass grammar. We feel deceit even when logic says otherwise. This is the psychic thread weaving comprehension beneath comprehension. In MLH, intuition is a mirrored sense, cognition extended through empathic resonance. In NSL, is the nervous system syntax, a language of shifts, constriction equals no, expansion equals yes. Learning to trust this grammar is not anti-rational, it is integrative, blending intellect with interoception. Cross-species dialogues in practice consider therapy programs, equine-assisted psychotherapy, EAP. Clients learn boundaries through posture, tone, and breathing. Horses mirror incongruence instantly, canine comfort programs. Dogs sense cortisol spikes, offering grounding through touch. Dolphin encounters, water amplifies acoustic resonance. Playful mimicry fosters joy and co-regulation. In all, the common denominator is attunement before articulation. Words follow, not lead. From a linguistic lens, these are proto-dialogues, turn-taking, feedback, rhythm, the scaffolds of grammar. Our oldest teachers were likely not philosophers, but animals teaching us the cadence of connection. Personal reflection. Silence in the field, I recall sitting once in stillness. No words, only breath when a robin bird landed nearby. For several minutes, we simply existed together. No fear, no claim, just mirrored awareness. Something in me softened. The mind stopped naming bird, branch, sky. Only rhythm remained. Breath in, breath out, two beings, one field. That moment taught more about language than any book. because I realized meaning begins in mutual regulation. Before we speak, we synchronize. Before we define, we align. Every linguistic act since then has felt like an echo of that silence, articulation rising from communion. Practice. Breathing into resonance, a simple NSL attunement. 1. Sit near an animal or tree or outside. 2. Observe your breath, slow it. 3. Match your exhale to their rhythm, the rise of the flank, rustle of leaf, sway of branch. 4. After several minutes, speak softly, even a single word of gratitude. 5. Notice the field. Did tension rise or fall? This is language in embryo. The mirror of meaning begins not in the mouth, but in modulation. Toward a theory of silent semantics. What if mirror neurons do more than reflect motion? What if they encode intention, transmitting semantic fields, packets of felt meaning, even without speech? In such a model, communication is holographic. Each gesture, tone, and breath carries the whole field of consciousness it arises from. When coherent, it's contagious. When fragmented, it repels. This would explain why a calm teacher settles a room, why a panicked leader spreads chaos, and why animals trust presence more than promises. MLH frames this as semantic resonance, understanding as vibrational matching. NSL operationalizes it, regulate first then speak. The balanced tone. We need not choose between mysticism and science. The psychic thread invites epistemic humility, knowing that knowing comes in many dialects. Empirical data sketches outlines, lived experience fills them with color. When we breathe with the world, we restore what linguistics calls mutual intelligibility, not of vocabulary, but of vibration. And perhaps that's the original grammar, a syntax of sympathy, a morphology of mirroring. Reflection prompt. Recall a moment when you knew something before words. What signals did you? Breath, pulse, goosebumps, emotion? How might you describe that language? Practice. For one day, try communicating more through tone, timing, and presence than content. Observe how relationships shift. The psychic thread reminds us, language is not the beginning of meaning, but its echo. Before words, there was resonance. Before syntax, there was sympathy. And even now, beneath every sentence, that frequency hums, the first and last language, understanding. Relearning the universal grammar language as habitat, listening as speech. If language began not as a code, but as a cadence, a pulse within the living field, then perhaps our greatest task now is not to invent a new tongue, but to remember the one we've forgotten. Not the syntax of dominance, but the grammar of relation. Not the precision of conquest, but the poetry of communion. For centuries, Western linguistics treated language as a uniquely human achievement, a cognitive crown set upon our species. Yet the longer I study the sounds of forests, oceans, and cities, the more I see language not as a human property, but as a habitat, an ecosystem of meaning in which all beings participate. We don't own language, we live within it. And perhaps that is the lesson the more than human world is trying to reteach us, that to speak clearly, we must first listen deeply. Ecolinguistics, the earth as grammar, the field of ecolinguistics, pioneered by thinkers like Aaron Stibb, Peter Mulhäusler, and David Abram, challenges the assumption that language is a sealed system floating above the world. Instead, they argue language grows from the world, shaped by climate, terrain, rhythm, and relationship. Desert cultures develop precise words for wind, mirage, and horizon. Arctic languages name dozens of kinds of snow, not pedantry, but ecological literacy. Tropical tongues build metaphors from humidity, light, and canopy. In each case, grammar mirrors geography. The way a people conjugate reflects how they move, how they survive. When industrial civilization flattens ecosystems, it flattens language too. Words for subtle shifts in season vanish when the seasons blur into one. Idioms rooted in rivers fade when the rivers are dammed. To forget an environment is to forget its speech. This is not nostalgia, it's neurology. Our brains are wired to the landscapes we inhabit. A silent forest shapes different metaphors than a noisy street. Ecolinguistics suggests that linguistic diversity is a form of biodiversity, each language a niche in the ecology of meaning. So when we say a language dies every 2 weeks, we are not just losing words. We are losing ways of perceiving reality, the metaphoric grammar of rivers, the syntax of rain, the stories of stars. To relearn the universal grammar, then, is to rewild our perception, to restore complexity, nuance, and balance to how we speak and how we listen. Cognitive linguistics, metaphor and embodiment. Long before Noam Chomsky's universal grammar of abstract rules, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, in Metaphors We Live By 1980, proposed a different foundation. Cognition is embodied. We understand the world through metaphor grounded in experience. We grasp ideas. We feel down when sad, uplifted when inspired. We stand firm in conviction, bend under pressure. Even our tenses reflect embodiment. The future approaches, the past lies behind. Language, in this view, is not detached logic, but structured sensation. Now imagine extending this beyond the human body to earth body metaphors. A river remembers its path. The mountain listens. The sky holds its breath. To modern ears, these sound poetic. To older cultures, they were simply descriptive, metaphors born from embodied contact with the more than human. Cognitive linguistics thus converges with eco-linguistics. Both insist that meaning is not arbitrary, but situated, forged through interaction, through movement, through the lived grammar of experience. And this is precisely where MLH and NSL find grounding. If mirror neurons extend empathy into language, then metaphors are mirrors in motion, linguistic reflections of the body meeting the world. If nervous systems tune through resonance, then speech that emerges from somatic awareness carries more truth than abstract jargon ever could. In other words, the universal grammar is not a fixed code, but a responsive field, one where balance is the rule. Ethical linguistics, speaking with, not over to relearn this grammar, is also an ethical act. Much of human speech has been monologic, speaking at the world, over the animal, about the other. Eco-linguists urge a shift toward dialogue, speaking with the world, recognizing the agency of all participants. Philosopher Martin Buber's concept of I, thou captures this shift. When I treat the tree as an it, I speak from utility. When I meet it as a thou, I speak from relation. This ethic of dialogue extends through the mirror linguistic hypothesis. Every utterance is mirrored. When we speak of domination, we receive resistance. When we speak with respect, we receive resonance. Nervous system language builds the practice. To speak with is to regulate first, to ensure our breath, tone, and timing invite rather than impose. A calm body communicates trust. A hurried one broadcasts threat. In this sense, grammar is moral. Our sentence structure reflects our stance toward others. Commands coerce. Questions invite. Pauses honor space. Interruptions erase it. So to relearn the universal grammar is to repattern intention, shifting from extraction to exchange, from broadcast to reciprocity. MLH. Meaning as mirrored balance, the mirror linguistic hypothesis posits that language is not merely symbolic but reflective, a living mirror that shapes perception through feedback loops of resonance. When we speak, we cast ripples into the field. Those ripples return as echoes, not just auditory but experiential. Harsh words tighten the chest, gentle tones open it. In animal communication, this mirror is visible. A bird mimics the melody of its neighbor, establishing rapport. A dolphin synchronizes clicks with its pod, weaving sonic identity. Wolves howl in chorus, tuning a collective chord. Humans, too, mirror in dialogue, micro-adjusting tone, pitch, and rhythm unconsciously. Linguist Deborah Tannen calls this conversational alignment, a subtle dance of empathy encoded in syntax and sound. Through MLH, we see that meaning isn't static content, it's dynamic coherence. Truth is not just what is said, but how it resonates across the shared field. Thus, relearning the universal grammar begins with rebalancing inner mirrors, tuning intention to reflection, self to world, word to silence. NSL. Speak as you wish to be received. Nervous system language teaches a simple, radical principle. Speak as you wish to be received. If you crave calm, speak calmly. If you desire clarity, breathe before words. If you seek connection, attune before articulation. This reverses the modern spell of performance, the reflex to shout louder, post faster, brand harder. In NSL, the body becomes the grammar of grace. Breath equals punctuation, or syntax. When we apply NSL to human-animal dialogue, humility returns. Instead of commanding, we listen. Instead of asserting, we align. We discover that understanding requires less vocabulary, not more. And in cross-cultural or ecological communication, NSL becomes diplomacy, a way of harmonizing before translating. In a world of noise, regulated speech is revolutionary. It rebuilds trust within ourselves, between each other, and across species. Personal reflection, listening as literacy. There was a time when I thought understanding required words. That fluency meant speed, mastery, eloquence. But through years of study and silence, I realized listening is the first language. Writing the Linguaverse, my inner child was broken. And this series, I began to see how reflection itself is dialogue, not only with the reader, but with the world that whispers between drafts. Some of the most profound insights didn't arrive as sentences. They arrived as sensations, a stillness, a shiver, a sudden knowing that rearranged perception. Relearning this universal grammar meant allowing silence to speak first, letting the nervous system settle before interpretation, recognizing that truth doesn't always shout, sometimes it rests in the pause. The more I listened to people, to landscapes, to animals, the more language felt less like a possession and more like a participation. Practice. Metaphor of the animal. Find a quiet place outdoors, a park, garden, or even a window ledge. Observe one living being, a bird, an insect, a tree, a cloud. Resist the urge to name or analyze. Simply watch. Then describe its rhythm in metaphor. The bird's flight is a question mark. The tree's sway is a slow breath. The ant's trail is a sentence of purpose. Ask yourself, what values, moods, or lessons emerge? Does this metaphor reveal something about your own state? How does observing without command alter your inner tempo? This is eco-poetic literacy, language learned through presence. The rewilded tongue to relearn the universal grammar is not to revert to primal grunts or abandon literacy. It is to restore reciprocity, to remember that every word carries an ecological consequence, to speak in ways that regenerate, not exhaust. When we treat language as habitat, we become gardeners of meaning, pruning noise, planting nuance, watering silence. When we treat listening as speech, we rediscover humility, the willingness to be changed by what we hear. The universal grammar was never lost. It's in the wind, the whale song, the heartbeat. All we need is to tune back in. Reflection prompt. When did you last feel the world speak to you, not in words, but in timing, rhythm, or symbol? What might that encounter be teaching you about your own grammar of being? Practice. For one day, treat every environment as a conversation. Notice what speaks, the hum of machines, the rustle of leaves, the silence of night. Ask, what language does this place teach me? Then answer not with words, but with presence. Reclaiming the human voice, every journey through language leads us back to one question. What does it mean to speak truthfully? Not linguistically correct, nor rhetorically polished, but truthfully, as in aligned with breath, heart, and presence. After walking through forests of animal song and fields of mirrored empathy, we return now to the human mouth, a tool both miraculous and dangerous. The echo within, to reclaim the human voice, is not to raise it louder, but to reattune it, to clear the static of ego, fear, and manipulation until what flows out mirrors what lives within. The earliest words humanity uttered were probably not declarations or demands. They were cries, lullabies, sighs, hums, the pre-semantic sounds of care and connection. Before grammar, there was rhythm. Before persuasion, resonance. The voice evolved not as a weapon, but as a bridge. Somewhere along the way, that bridge became a stage. Speech, once shared as an offering, became a performance of control. Words became tools to extract, to brand, to convince. In recovering the human voice, we must unlearn the habits of spectacle. Reclamation begins in listening, not outward, but inward. The echo within is quiet, easily drowned by obligation, entertainment, and urgency. Yet it waits beneath every syllable, asking, do I still mean what I say? This is where reverence returns, not as silence, but as sincerity. Every phrase carries weight, every tone traces intention. To speak is to act upon the world. When we forget that, language becomes cheap, inflated like currency unbacked by gold. To reclaim voice is to restore the gold standard of meaning, coherence between word, body, and soul. Humility and attunement animals teach us humility in communication. They do not speak to impress. Their signals are clean, necessary, and embodied. A bird calls because dawn has come, not to brand the sunrise. A whale sings across oceans, not for applause. Even in warning, their tones contain precision, not cruelty. Humility, then, is not weakness. It is clarity. It is speech that knows its place within a larger chorus. When a wolf howls, it joins a geography of sound, trees, echoes, wind. Human voice once did the same, chanting in caves, singing across valleys, weaving with drums and rain. Our modern isolation, soundproof rooms, noise-cancelling headphones, endless talking without listening, has dulled that instinct. We speak at rather than with. To reclaim voice, humility must precede articulation. This does not mean silence forever, but softening before sounding. In practice, humility looks like pausing before opinion, breathing before reaction, and asking before asserting. It is the micro moment where the nervous system settles, allowing empathy to lead. Here, NSL whispers its principle. Speak as you breathe, calmly, consciously, rhythmically. Words born of regulated breath carry steadier resonance. They soothe rather than startle. In contrast, speech from constriction, shallow, rushed, tight, transmits unease, no matter the content. The physiology speaks louder than vocabulary. Animals sense it instantly. Humans too, though often unconsciously. In meetings, debates, or family discussions, tone outweighs logic. A calm no lands softer than a frantic yes. Reclaiming voice means reclaiming nervous system authorship, refusing to let adrenaline dictate the script. Speech as stewardship. What if language were treated as land, tended, rotated, restored? Modern communication behaves like an extractive industry, mining attention, clear-cutting nuance, polluting silence. Stewardship begins with awareness of impact. Every utterance alters the commons of meaning. Every metaphor plants a seed. Eco-linguists such as Aaron Stibb remind us that phrases can degrade ecosystems or protect them. When the media describe forests as resources rather than homes, they shift perception toward consumption. When we speak of people as units, targets, or human capital, we reduce beings to metrics. Stewardship invites rewilding speech, choosing words that honor relationship over reduction. To reclaim the human voice, we might adopt 3 ecological vows. 1. Not harm, avoid words that wound unnecessarily. 2. Cultivate diversity, welcome multiple dialects, stories, truths. 3. Restore balance, give silence time to regenerate meaning. These vows transform conversation from competition to cultivation. Imagine classrooms where questions outnumber answers, workplaces where pauses signal respect, not weakness, politics where concession is seen as wisdom, not defeat. Stewardship is less about censorship than consciousness, knowing that every word leaves a footprint. The MLH appears here like sunlight on leaves. Communication thrives through mirroring. When we listen deeply, we reflect dignity. Our tone tells others, I see you as alive as I am. Such mirroring nourishes trust, the soil where dialogue grows. Trust between body and word. Modern rhetoric often divorces voice from body. We draft emails that betray our exhaustion, post smiles over sorrow, say I'm fine while trembling inside. Each dissonance erodes self-trust, the bond between physiology and phrase. Animals cannot fake this, their signals remain embodied. Reclaiming the human voice demands re-embodiment, letting sensations rejoin sentences. Begin with awareness. The chest tightens before defensiveness, the throat constricts before withholding truth, breath pauses before confession. When noticed, these cues invite recalibration. The goal is not perfect serenity but alignment, word and body facing the same direction. Somatic therapists note that congruent speech regulates both speaker and listener. Saying I'm angry while breathing steadily integrates emotion, suppressing it fragments coherence. Likewise, expressing gratitude with a tense jaw confuses the field. Coherence transmits safety, the currency of real dialogue. Trust also means allowing vulnerability. A voice that trembles with sincerity may heal more than one polished in denial. In an age of scripted branding, authentic imperfection signals reality. Audiences, students, and clients feel when language lives. Here NSL again offers gentle guidance. Regulate first, articulate second. A single grounding breath can transmute reaction into response. Over time, this practice rewires association. Speech no longer equates to threat, but to release. The body learns it is safe to speak the truth. Mirror linguistic hypothesis integration. Mirroring as mutual understanding. According to the mirror linguistic hypothesis, understanding emerges not merely from decoding symbols, but from resonant reflection, a neuro-linguistic dance where speaker and listener co-create meaning. Mirror neurons implicated in empathy and imitation suggest that perception and action share circuitry. When we witness another's gesture or tone, our brain rehearses it internally. Communication, then, is embodied simulation. Applied softly, MLH reminds us to understand mirror with integrity. Listen not only for content, but cadence. Not only for argument, but effect. When conversation falters, mismatched rhythm is often to blame. Two nervous systems out of sync cannot share nuance. Practical stewardship might look like matching pace, reflecting phrasing, or echoing emotion. That sounds frustrating. Such mirroring is not mimicry. It is acknowledgement, the linguistic equivalent of eye contact. In reclaiming the human voice, we restore its choral nature, dialogue as duet, not duel. Nervous system language, integration, calm presence shaping resonance. The nervous system language views speech as an extension of regulation. Tone, tempo, and volume broadcast internal states more clearly than vocabulary. When leaders, teachers, or parents speak from grounded breath, they offer co-regulation, a silent assurance of safety. Consider crisis negotiators. Success hinges less on persuasion than on paraverbal steadiness. Phrases like, I'm here with you matter, but their power arises from a tone that slows the listener's pulse. Likewise, therapeutic dialogue often succeeds when voice mirrors calm curiosity. To cultivate NSL in daily life, begin sentences on an exhale. Let pauses punctuate thought. Lower volume to invite leaning in. End statements with warmth, not sharpness. Over time, this shapes an acoustic ecology of care, households, classrooms, and online spaces where sound itself heals. Personal reflection. When words failed and presence spoke louder, I remember moments in my own life when speech collapsed, times of grief where no phrase could bridge the gulf, meetings where explanation only deepened misunderstanding. In those spaces, something quieter took over, a shared glance, a steady breath, a hand resting on the table. Meaning arrived without syntax. Later, reflecting through the Linguaverse and my inner child was broken, I realized these silences were not voids but thresholds, points where authenticity demanded more than language could hold. Rather than forcing articulation, I began honoring pause. Often, the other person would fill it with their truth, drawn out by safety, not pressure. These experiences retaught me that voice is more than volume. It is present. Sometimes the most eloquent statement is a steady gaze saying, I'm still here. Reclaiming the human voice, then, is less about mastering rhetoric than restoring resonance, allowing language to serve relationship, not ego. Activity, the resonance recording practice, voice as mirror. 1. Choose a short poem, affirmation, or passage that feels sincere. 2. Before speaking, take 3 slow breaths, feeling your feet grounded. 3. Record yourself reading aloud, not for perfection, but presence. 4. Play it back once. Notice your tone, tempo, tension. 5. Then breathe again and repeat, softening wherever strain appeared. Compare the 2 recordings. Which one feels more truthful? This exercise reveals how physiology sculpts phonetics, how calmness clarifies consonants, and how warmth rounds vowels. Over time, such practice transforms public speaking, parenting, and self-talk alike. You become your own tuning fork. Transition toward communion. Having re-anchored in humility, coherence, and stewardship, we approach the final horizon, speech dissolving into communion. Part 6, Communication Beyond Speech, will ask whether language's highest purpose is not expression but union, the word becoming silence again, not from loss, but fulfillment. To reclaim the human voice is ultimately to release it, to know when to sing and when to listen, when to name and when to kneel before the ineffable. Only a voice rooted in humility can join the greater chorus without seeking to dominate it. So take a breath, feel its echo ripple outward. The same air that moves through your lungs stirs the leaves, carries the birdsong, fills the whale's call. Speaking from that awareness, every word becomes a blessing and every silence an amen. Communion beyond speech language dissolving into being. There comes a point in every exploration of language where the words themselves begin to thin, where the edges of grammar blur into the hum of breath, where saying becomes sensing and sensing becomes knowing. We've travelled far across this series through the roots of utterance, the birth of meaning, the rise of grammar, and the architectures of power, and yet, standing here on the edge of speech, the greatest lesson begins where language ends, because to understand language fully, one must eventually fall silent. Not a silence of absence or ignorance, but a silence of fullness, the kind where every rustle, pulse, and exhale becomes a word in a wider lexicon. This is the horizon of communion, the return of speech to its source. I've often reflected that the first word ever spoken was not heard, but felt. The tremor of a heartbeat, the intake of breath before sound, the vibration that travelled skin to skin before symbols were ever carved in air. And maybe, if we strip language down to its most elemental truth, that's where it always was. Not in letters, not in tongues, but in resonance. In this final part, we turn not to the architecture of grammar, but to the fabric of being itself. We step into a space where language dissolves, not because it fails, but because it fulfills its purpose. Words guide us to awareness, silence lets us inhabit it. Mystical unity, dissolving into being meditation. Dreamtime, stillness. These are not escapes from language, they are its ancestors. When I first began sitting in silence, not as a performance of calm, but as a sincere act of listening, I expected emptiness. What arrived was everything. There was a day, and I've spoken of it before, where stillness opened like a portal in my mind. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a vision in the traditional sense. It was a sudden clarity, a lifting of veils. I felt, not thought, felt that all communication, all perception, all relationship was vibration. Words were ripples on the surface of a deeper tide. In that moment, I knew something language could only hint at. That consciousness isn't bound by syntax. It hums in every cell. It pulses in the air between us. It speaks through eyes, gestures, breath, and proximity. It doesn't need to be translated, because it never stopped being shared. Later, I would find philosophical echoes of this in Merleau-Ponty's Flesh of the World, the idea that all beings, human, animal, tree, stone, participate in the same sentient fabric. We do not look at the world, we look from within it. To speak is not to stand apart, but to reverberate with the whole. And in that sense, every word ever uttered is an act of communion, a ripple cast into the shared field of being. Even silence participates. It is not nothingness, but pure potential, the pause before the world breathes again. The shared field of awareness Martin Buber called this sacred recognition the I-thou relationship, the meeting of presence with presence, without objectification. When we meet another being, whether human, animal, or otherwise, not as an it, but as a thou, we step beyond description into dialogue. The encounter becomes mutual. The space between us becomes holy. To engage in true dialogue, Buber said, is to be changed by what you meet. And isn't that the essence of communion, that we emerge from it different, expanded, more whole? When I've sat quietly with an animal, a dog resting its head on my leg, a cat curling into the crook of my arm, a bird landing close enough to catch my eye, I felt that wordless meeting. Not dominance, not interpretation, just recognition. Two nervous systems are co-regulating. Two forms of life, breathing the same air, acknowledging each other's aliveness. This is not sentimentality, it's physiology. Studies from institutions like Stanford, the University of Sussex, and the HeartMath Institute show measurable synchrony between human and animal heart rates, breath rhythms, and cortisol levels during calm contact. When we soften our gaze, slow our breathing, and extend warmth, animals mirror us, not out of conditioning, but out of attunement. And we mirror them in return. Empathy is not abstract, it's electromagnetic. This is nervous system dialogue, NSL at its most primal, a co-created language of tone, gesture, and energy. No translation required. In these exchanges, we remember something older than speech, that understanding doesn't always arrive as a sentence. Sometimes it arrives as presence. Animals as mirrors of consciousness. When I look at animals now, I don't see lower life forms or metaphorical teachers. I see mirrors, fragments of consciousness expressing themselves through different grammars. A bird's song, a whale's call, the way a horse flicks its ears or a dog tilts its head, each is a syntax of sensation, a vocabulary of instinct, a grammar of the moment. They do not fabricate, they embody. And in that embodiment lies a form of honesty that language sometimes obscures. Animals remind us how to speak with the body, to communicate congruently, where feeling and form align. When a cat purrs, it means peace. When a crow caws, it signals an alert. No double meanings, no euphemisms, no spin. Their speech is being. In that purity, I glimpse what human language once was, before we layered it with performance, before we monetized attention, before words became instruments of branding. Animals still speak from the root of experience. They still live inside the sentence of breath. And when we listen, truly listen, something within us reawakens. A nervous system older than words remembers how to hear. MLH, the final mirror, the mirror linguistic hypothesis began, for me, as a simple question. If mirror neurons allow us to feel another's intention before words are spoken, could language itself be a mirror, a surface upon which consciousness reflects and refines itself? In communion with animals, that hypothesis finds its ultimate test. Here, meaning travels not through shared vocabulary, but through shared vibration. A glance, a posture, a sigh, each is a micro-utterance of the field. When I calm myself beside a trembling animal, I am not telling them they're safe. I am showing safety through physiology. The mirror neurons between us translate that intention into felt experience. This is language before articulation, the first dialect of the world. In these encounters, the boundaries between self and other soften. Empathy ceases to be metaphorical, it becomes measurable resonance. And the MLH reminds me, the more coherent my internal state, the clearer the reflection I cast. To speak, or even be with integrity, I must first tune the instrument of my own awareness. NSL, the final language, if MLH offers the theory that intention reverberates through mirrors of mind, then NSL offers the practice, language as co-regulation. In NSL, every word is a breath, every tone is a signal, every silence is an invitation to safety. When I engage an animal, or a child, or a stranger, I can choose to speak from dysregulation, tightness, urgency, demand, or from presence, softness, curiosity, care. The latter invites harmony, the former conflict. NSL teaches that before I choose my words, I should check my breath. If I speak from constriction, my sentences will strangle. If I breathe, they will bridge, and as words dissolve into awareness, breath becomes the last remaining syntax. Inhale, receive. Exhale, release. This is grammar without grammar, poetry without page. The final language is not English, Sanskrit, or Latin. It is resonance itself, and all beings are fluent. Practice. Wordless observation, find a quiet space. 5 minutes, no agenda, no devices. Observe 4 presences, a human, an animal, a plant, and the air itself. Don't label them, don't narrate. Simply watch, breathe, let your senses do the listening. Then, when the timer sounds, journal what you felt. Not what you thought or analyzed, but what arose in your body, sensations, warmth, stillness, expansion, curiosity. You may notice that understanding arrived without vocabulary. That empathy bloomed without articulation. That reality spoke and you heard, without words. That is communion. That is language, returned to its source. Integration, bringing silence into speech. As we return from silence, something shifts. Words, once wielded for persuasion or performance, soften. They become offerings, not arguments. To speak after silence is to realize every sentence carries a pulse. Every utterance is borrowed breath. Every conversation is an act of co-creation. This is what animals, dreams, and stillness teach. That the point of language is not domination, but connection. Not noise, but nuance. Not naming, but knowing. And as we move toward the next realm, the language of dreams, we carry this awareness forward. For dreams, too, are conversations between conscious and unconscious, symbol and soul. And to hear them, we must learn once again to listen beneath the noise. Reflection. What have animals taught you about silence, presence, or speech? Perhaps a pet who sensed your sadness and sat beside you in wordless empathy. Perhaps a bird whose song pulled you out of thought and into wonder. Perhaps a wild creature's gaze that reminded you you're part of something vaster. Reflect on what these moments taught about attention, humility, and resonance. How did they shift your understanding of communication? How might they reshape the way you speak to humans with tone, patience, and awareness? Activity, the resonance lexicon, create your own species dictionary. List words, gestures, and silences that bridge understanding beyond species. Include touch, a hand extended, a gentle pat, tone, a soft hum, a coo, posture, open chest, softened shoulders. Note which brings calm, curiosity, or trust. You'll begin to see patterns. Gentleness transcends language. Patience translates everywhere. Stillness speaks louder than any script. Keep this lexicon as a reminder. Fluency is not about vocabulary, it's about presence. All language is borrowed breath. We inhale the atmosphere shared by trees and oceans, exhale stories into its currents, and forget too often that our voices are temporary guests in a greater conversation. Every word we utter, every silence we hold, echoes through a network of beings we barely comprehend. To speak kindly is to honor that inheritance. To listen deeply is to repay it. So as this episode closes and our attention drifts toward dreams, remember, language was never ours alone. It is a commons, a field, a web spun between lungs and leaves, hearts and hooves, neurons and stars. To honor it, we must speak slowly. To protect it, we must listen widely. To live it, we must breathe with awareness. Thank you for joining me in this episode. Stay curious. Stay listening, and remember, even silence has grammar. You've been listening to the Linguaverse. I'm James Miller.